Welcome to Moveable Do. This is Steve Danielson. I'm a composer, conductor, and music educator. On this podcast, I talk with other composers and discover how they began their journey into composition. Join me each week as we explore their lives, their musical journeys, and of course, their music. To learn more about this podcast and access a complete archive of episodes, including the series of shorter segments called Movable Snippets, visit my website at sdcompose.com/moveabledo.
Hey, this is Steve. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Moveable Do. I feel fortunate today to be able to do this podcast in person from my office at the high school where I work. My guest today is Dr. Eric Scott Alexander. Eric is currently Associate Professor at Boise State University, where he is the Associate Chair of the Department of Music and teaches courses in music composition and music theory. Eric earned a Doctor of Musical Arts in Composition from Boston University and a Bachelor of Music Composition from the University of Colorado Boulder. He has received performances and commissions from numerous performing groups and solo musicians, including the Tree City Chamber Players, Idaho Dance Theater, the Boise State Narrative Television Initiative, the Playground Ensemble, the Greeley Colorado Multicultural Festival, and the Boise State University Symphonic Winds, and many others. Eric Alexander, welcome to Moveable Do.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So let's start back at the very beginning.
Sure.
I've heard very good things happen at the beginning. So where did you actually grow up? You weren't from Boise, right?
Correct. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was born there, grew up there, and ended up going to my undergraduate studies were also in Boulder at the University of Colorado.
Okay, and when did you first get into music? Were you doing piano lessons, or what were you doing?
Yeah, I was in school. I was playing trombone. That was my instrument. And probably fourth grade, I think that started. And then I also took piano lessons around the same time. And my piano teacher was getting a little frustrated with me because I wanted to spend more time figuring things out by ear than learning the music that she was trying to teach me. And then she realized that that was actually something that was very important to me. And so she said, okay, half your lesson can be helping you write your compositions down. The other half can be, reading music. And that was a perfect combination. So,
oh, nice. Yeah. So you started writing music just right out of the gate.
Yeah, it was elementary school somewhere around the line. Yeah, I liked playing by ear, improvising on the piano. And I think I remember I came up with a great rendition of Chariots of Fire.
Oh, nice.
From the 80s movie back in the day. Yeah.
So do you still have any of those old compositions laying around somewhere?
I do. I have my earliest stuff. I have it all in a file drawer in my office at school.
Oh, that's awesome. So would you say that you were a music prodigy, or were you, hoofing it through like the rest of us?
Oh, I think just hoofing it through. Yeah. I was just super interested in music. I just think I did have a good ear. But I just started writing stuff down from an early age, and that's just kind of figuring out how to get down what you hear in your head it takes time.
Yeah.
and practice. So I just was able to start early. So
yeah. So when you were growing up, when you were like a teenager, what sort of music were you listening to? Mm-hmm. What influenced you?
Yeah, I would say it was. I'll even go back to I didn't even go back to elementary school. So I remember asking for the Nutcracker LP for Christmas, but yet most of the music I listened to was popular music. And when I got to junior high, I would say it was probably 70% popular, current popular music and 30% classical. I discovered my parents had a set of classical music and set of these records that are, a compilation of like the greatest hits kind of things. And I sort of fell in love with these pieces. And I'd say through high school, my proportion of popular music to classical probably switched over a little bit more, to be a little bit heavier on the classical side. And I actually collected CDs back then. So every time I had any extra money, I would go out and buy CDs so I could listen to things over and over again. And so I don't know. I think I have a pretty fairly eclectic listening. Popular jazz, classical, but it sort of shifted much more toward classical toward high school and then college.
Sure. So when you got to college, you went straight into composition. When did you decide that you wanted to pursue music?
I was a senior in high school when I decided I was sure that's what I wanted to do, which is not normal. So anyone who doesn't know in high school if they want to do, don't feel bad. But I just knew that I wanted to be a professor and be a composer. from back then, probably my senior year in high school. It was either that or being a pilot. There were two.
Or a pilot.
My two loves that I had were aviation and music, and I ended up with music. Yeah.
Awesome. Have you ever taken flying lessons on the side?
I've had a couple demo type flights, but I've never actually had lessons yet. So,
when you decided you wanted to become a musician, a composer, how did your parents feel? Were they supportive of you?
They were very supportive.
A little nervous,
yeah, they were very supportive. Possibly, somewhat naive as to the difficulty of that career track, but they had been always very supportive of me being a composer.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So now you're a professor at Boise State. You used to teach at the University of Northern Colorado. So when did teaching sort of enter the path of your musical journey?
Yeah, I had not a direct path. I immediately after high school, I went right to University of Colorado, got my degree. Went straight to Boston University and did what's called a post-baccalaureate doctorate, so a master's and doctorate all in one.
Okay.
Kind of a deal. And then as soon as I graduated from Boston University, I remember I applied to one job and I didn't get it. And I thought, well, maybe this isn't the right thing I'm doing. And just so if anyone's familiar with applying to university jobs, you apply to hundreds,
right?
Not just one. And so I kind of thought, I don't know what I'm doing, and I sort of ended up being in sales. And my first job, actually, out of getting my doctorate, was selling ADT security systems door to door. And so that actually got me really good at dealing with people and getting in front of people, which is something I was not good at before. So even though that was completely unmusically related, I still think it was a good thing for me to have kind of done that. And then I ended up in sales for a few years, different jobs, but never completely happy. Most of the time it was sitting in a cubicle at a desk making phone calls, and I would bring scores to study on the side and things like that. I just was fairly miserable just not being in music. And finally I decided I would go back to school, possibly become a high school band teacher I was thinking of. Mm-hmm. So I went back to the University of Northern Colorado, which is a great teacher school. And while I was there, they found out that I already had a doctorate, and they said, we need someone to help us teach theory. And so I started teaching as an adjunct, and then I ended up transitioning from being a student to being an adjunct professor teaching theory and composition and stuff. And that's how I got back into music.
Oh, it's a great step, I can tell you. So when you are starting a new music composition class or an individual lesson with a student, where do you start? Is there a lesson you feel like they need first?
It depends on the student. Mm-hmm. And so what I like to do is know a lot about the student first. Some students have already written music for years. Sometimes they really haven't written anything at all, but they just have a strong desire. And so I kind of want to figure out where they are, what they know, and what they're interested in doing. And then I kind of go from there. So it may be, let's talk about melody for the next couple of weeks. Let's, talk about, you want to write a piece for strings? Let's listen to some string quartets and look at string music, or whatever the case might be. It just sort of depends on a lot of things. It's very individualized for each student. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I do teach as groups as well, new composers, and we'll go through talking about, melody, harmony, rhythm, form, and structure in music, instrumentation, all sorts of different things. And then becomes more individualized after that, depending on what they're actually working on themselves.
Yeah. Are you teaching more atonal or tonal, or sort of a mix of both?
Most students are writing tonal music.
Okay.
Yeah. What I like is my students to, after the 4 years that they study with me, that they have ability to write in a lot of different styles. Mm-hmm. And in part of the theory sequence, we do study atonal music, but I don't push any particular type of music on them. Most of my music is not atonal either. It is generally tonal or modal, but I allow students to do what they want, but I like to push them out of whatever box they're in. So if they're really comfortable writing for a certain kind of music, I will try to push them at least out of that and get them some experience outside of that, which they usually appreciate because then that takes them in other directions.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you are the father of 3 teenagers.
I am.
So I know that keeps the family busy. So how do you balance family and composition time? Do you have a particular time of day that's best for you, or what?
Yeah, I often I like to work at either at night or in the morning, and it seems like it's hard to do both sometimes. But if it's like a weekend morning, if I like to have a block of time where it's just quiet and no one's bothering me for a while. So if it often on like a Saturday morning or something, I might find a block of time, or sometimes at night, depending on if there's how much there's going on at home.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say mornings are my favorite time to compose typically.
Very nice. So let's talk about your process for a moment when you're writing. How do you approach writing a new piece of music? Where do you start?
Sure. I think it's really important to first have an idea of like what the piece is about. And it doesn't have to be a story necessarily, but who's this for? Who's the audience going to be? What's the purpose of it? And is there something else? Is there another topic that this is about? Like, for example, the Sawtooth Sketches that I think we'll be talking about. It's about the Sawtooth Mountains. And it's sort of different pictures from different maybe times of the day, different times of the year, different environments within the Sawtooth Mountains. So that already gives me something to kind of work off of. So from that point, I would think about what sort of musical material am I using? Is this going to be tonal? Is it going to be not tonal? Is it going to be using, what sort of scales or chords, harmonies am I going to be using? And then what's the character of the piece? Mm-hmm. And those things all sort of meld together to then point me in the direction of what I'm doing. Then I might have, I call them just sketch pages, where I just write down ideas by hand and maybe improvising on the piano. It's coming up with ideas and deciding what it is that I want to say in the piece and some of the motives or ideas that I want to use. And then I transition more toward my notation program.
Okay, cool. So I know you've written for a lot of different ensembles, different voicings, instrumentation. Do you have a favorite type of ensemble to write for?
I think I like writing for non-traditional ensembles.
Okay.
Ensembles that don't already have a lot of literature for them. So that's one thing that made that piece exciting. Also for the Tree City Ensemble, piano, oboe, flute, and cello. And that's not, they don't have like libraries of music sitting around like there are for string quartets, So it's something that's unique, and there's the ensemble's unique, and I like writing for those sorts of situations. Yeah.
Very cool. So what has been one of the most unusual things you've ever written? Maybe something back in college, I don't know, but something that sort of outside the box.
So I have a piece called Sirens that I did when I was a grad student in Boston. And it's all the sound completely comes from sirens that I recorded outside my window.
Oh, very interesting.
And so I spent for a month or whatever, I lived downtown, so it was sirens. Pretty busy. Yeah, it was not, you didn't have to wait too long. But first, I don't know, several weeks maybe, I just had back in the day, it was a mini disc recorder, microphone sitting on my windowsill. And if fire truck or something was coming down the street, I would just record it and then turn it off. And then I ended up just playing around with the sounds, taking them apart, putting them back together in different ways, speeding it up, slowing it down. And I created this piece called Sirens. And it also includes the motorcycle police that were guiding the bus. What was it? The Yankees. I think it was when the Yankees were playing the Red Sox.
Okay.
It was the players would take buses down the street to get on their way down to Fenway Park, and it was the police motorcycles that were accompanying them. So anyway, that was kind of a fun little historical thing that's in there as well. But the piece basically I just pieced it together using Pro Tools, and the whole piece has kind of a siren shape, or like a wave shape, that's pretty fun. That's probably the most unique thing I've done.
Very cool. I'd like to hear that. All right, I got one more question for you that's going to make you sort of think a little bit. So if you could create a soundtrack for the most mundane activity or routine in your life, what would it be? And which instruments or musical elements would you include to make it unexpectedly epic?
Okay. The most mundane, like maybe driving to work or something?
Sure.
Okay. Tying my shoes or something? Okay. Yeah, I could see a full symphony orchestra for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Which activity do you think you would choose?
Yeah, gosh.
Like the brushing your teeth symphony?
I'm trying to think, what's the most boring thing I do in a day? Yeah, maybe just like walking from my car to the building or something like that. I don't know.
Awesome. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to listen to some of Eric's compositions. Welcome back. This is Steve Danielson. I'm talking today with Dr. Eric Scott Alexander. So, Eric, we're going to start today with Sawtooth Sketches, which you mentioned a little bit in the first segment, for piano, oboe, cello, and piano. As you mentioned, this piece was commissioned by the Tree City Chamber Players in Boise, Idaho. So what can you tell us about writing this piece, and what sort of things were you thinking about when you wrote?
Yeah. So the piece was commissioned by the Tree City Ensemble for a concert that was going to be Idaho-themed. And it was really exciting. I'd heard them play a couple times, amazing musicians. And so I got to work, and I started by thinking of just scenes in my head from... growing up in Colorado, I spent a lot of times in the mountains. It wasn't the Sawtooths, but a lot of times in the mountains. And then we had also visited the Sawtooths since we had moved here to the Boise area. And I just had certain sort of scenes in my head. And I decided I wanted there to be some sort of a narrative to it, not just like this picture and that picture. But basically what I decided to do is make it revolve around the cycle of fire in the mountains. And of course, every summer season we have forest fires, and it's always a problem, and it's always causes a lot of smoke and destruction, and there's a lot of drama involved with that. But with the destruction that comes with that also comes with a new forest that will eventually grow afterwards. Mm-hmm. And so it's in 5 movements. The first 2 movements are just different scenes in the Sawtooths, and it's just sort of setting this beautiful landscape. And then the middle movement is called Fire, and that's a fire. At the end of that, then we get to Restoration and Regrowth, which is you can sort of hear the little maybe seedlings popping up out of the soil and starting the whole process over again. Uh-huh.
Very cool. And for those that don't know, those of our listeners, the Sawtooth Mountains are sort of right there in central Idaho. So if you're trying to picture on a map where they are. So were there certain parts, did you have a specific part of the Sawtooth Mountains in mind as you were listening, or was it just sort of a general overview?
It's sort of general, just from what I had seen and what I would just sort of picture in my mind's eye, I guess, and as well as I think one of the titles is Thompson Peak and Winter Sun, and that was actually, that title came from a book on Idaho that I was just flipping through, and there was a photograph titled, I think it was just called A Peak in Winter Sun, and I just love that title. Uh-huh. So I thought I'd just be a little more specific, and Thompson Peak and Winter Sun, and just having that picture of the sun low in the sky and the kind of the pinkish hue that it has on the snow as the sun's going down. So that's what I was sort of picturing.
All right. Okay, well, we are going to now listen to Sawtooth Sketches, performed here by the Tree City Chamber Players. All right, our second piece today, Joy and Reflection for Symphonic Band. So I'd like to get in your mind a little bit here. I mostly, though not exclusively, write for choruses and deal frequently with text. When you're writing a piece for symphonic band, there's no text attached to the work, so how do you start? You sort of talked a little bit about your process in the first half, so let's be more specific to this piece. How did you sort of structure this? Did you map it out first, or what were you doing?
Yeah. So this is a piece that was Marcellus Brown, who was the Symphonic Winds director for many years, asked me to write this piece, and I wanted to write something that was energetic and fun, but had some drama in it as well, some different sections. And I don't usually start off with a map. I know some composers do, but I like to get started. And once I had my ideas, I started getting ideas down. Then I came up with a map, and I said, okay, this is going to be A, this is going to be B, this is going to be C, and so on. And that's kind of how I pieced that together. And one section just kind of led to the next in that piece. So
reflections on what? It's called Joy and Reflection. Mm-hmm. So what are you reflecting on?
Sort of just on life. It's not. There's nothing super specific. It's not about a certain story in my life necessarily, mm-hmm. but it's just sort of like the joy of life and reflecting back on things. Maybe what gave you joy, maybe what didn't, and just reflecting on life basically with a positive outlook.
Awesome. And Marcellus Brown was the one that was that commissioned this?
Yeah, and conducted it, yeah.
Okay. Was it a commission for an anniversary or just to have a new work for the ensemble?
Just wanted a new piece, and I was fairly new. I'd only been at Boise State for a year or so, and so it was he was wanting to get a new piece out of me as the new composer. Yeah.
Very good. All right, well, we're going to listen to the Boise State Symphonic Winds perform Joy and Reflection with Marcellus Brown conducting. All right, our third piece today, Symmetry of Trees for solo cello. So explain this title to us and how the symmetry might be reflected in the music we're about to hear.
Sure. It was composed for the Stein Luminary, which is a room in the new art building on the Boise State campus, Center for Visual Arts, which is basically 3 walls of giant touch screens. And they're actually projected onto these glass panels. But they all work together, and they can do all kinds of things. Initially, it was meant to be sort of like a museum where you can walk through a museum and you can look at art and you can make it larger and smaller. And they actually ended up finding ways to make it more interactive. And so we wanted to have a piece to kind of show off what this could do with the interactive part. So this piece was written for Brian Hodges, who's our cello professor at Boise State. And it was premiered originally in the space with interactive software that was going through a microphone and actually changing with the way he was playing and the pitches he was playing and things like that. So that was pretty fun project. As far as the Symmetry of Trees, the title, I've always been really interested in how a lot of natural shapes will look very similar. Branches of a tree will look very much like arteries and veins or your lungs. It's all kind of the same sort of pattern. And so it was really kind of exploring that sort of idea about the symmetry of trees above ground and below ground, which is kind of a reflection in some ways with the root system and the trees above ground. And I was just inspired by that.
Yeah, so not so much that a tree is symmetrical with itself on both sides, but the symmetry of trees and humans and how we relate that way.
Yeah.
That's a really cool concept. So when you are writing for a solo instrument versus, say, an orchestra or a chamber ensemble, what sort of challenges do you have that you might not have with a full ensemble?
Yeah. When you're writing for an ensemble, of course, one thing I think about a lot is I want it to be fairly equal experience for everyone. So, the oboe will be equal to the cello, equal to the piano, equal to the flute, each of them having their own limelight at different times. And within a solo instrument, it's just them. Mm-hmm. And so it's, I think it can be more difficult in some ways to keep it interesting, for maybe lack of a better term, when you don't have a lot of other timbres and sounds and textures that you can get with another ensemble. It's just all up to this one person, which is also what makes it really cool. And so I did experiment with some different kind of sounds and some pizzicato glissandi and some sounds that I felt were unique, that kind of gave it its own sort of personal sound.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are going to listen to Symmetry of Trees, performed here by Brian Hodges on cello. Our last piece today, Oedipus Tremendous, and this is all digital. So I understand this was written for a play by the same name, produced by Theater Arts at Boise State. Was all the music for this whole production digital, or just this piece, or how? Tell me about this work.
Yeah, so it was a play, and it wasn't. It's not a musical or anything, and so I was asked just to write the music that would be used just as people are coming in and sitting down, and just kind of set this sort of
like incidental music.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when I went to the play, they actually played it throughout. It kept coming back in, and so they used it many times actually. But it was sort of just initially to set the kind of tone for this play, which was they wanted it to be it's this kind of this ancient tale, but it was very modernized, and they had lights, and again, they're like glasses that had lights in them, and it was kind of a very modern, but it was very ancient at the same time, and so they wanted something that was kind of both with the music. And so the music has, you'll hear harp. It just sounds like just a harp. But then there's also these electronic sounds that you can't probably necessarily tell exactly what they are, and there's other acoustic sounding, and some flutes and some percussion and some other things that sound normal, and other things that are less so.
Yeah.
A little more.
Yeah, there's definitely some electronic sounds in there that cannot be produced
right,
acoustically.
Exactly.
So talk about the differences between working digitally versus acoustically. What advantages or disadvantages did you find?
Yeah. So I guess an advantage is that you can kind of do it what you want. You don't have to really worry about can this player do this, and what you hear is what you get, and what you can create is what you have, as opposed to writing for acoustic instruments. Everything obviously part of composing is writing idiomatically for an instrument and writing for that instrument and that particular player. So with digital music, of course, that's not a thing. But if you're digital music that is representing acoustic instruments, you have to be careful with, because if you have them do things that the actual instrument can't do, it sounds wrong.
Right.
Even for someone who's not musically trained, hearing a flute do something that it can't really do, or trombone doing something it can't really do, it just doesn't sound right, even if they don't know exactly why. And so I try to be careful between, if I am including acoustic instruments with digital, the acoustic instruments are doing what those instruments could do in real life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to... Oh, I did want to ask one other thing about the name. I want to know more about this play, Oedipus Tremendous. Like, can you give me a little bit of synopsis of what the play is about?
Yeah, it's based on the Oedipus legend.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just sort of a modernized version of that. And there's possibly some political overtones with it as well, with use of the word tremendous.
Gotcha.
So I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, we are now going to listen to Oedipus Tremendous. Here, I was going to say performed by, but it's all digital. So I guess performed by your computer.
It is performed by a computer. I use the program is called Logic.
Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. Well, Eric, what are you working on now that you can tell us about?
Right now, I am working on a piece for our Bronco percussion ensemble and saxophone. So that'll be the next thing that'll hopefully be done in the spring semester.
Okay, that's another ensemble that I don't hear a lot of music for. Percussion ensemble and saxophone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a few out there, but it's not as common as other things for sure.
Well, if my listeners want to learn more about you, what's your website? Where are you located online?
Yeah, ericscottalexander.com.
Okay. And are you out there on Facebook and things like that as well?
Yeah, I think you can find me on Facebook. You can certainly, if anybody wants to contact me, certainly feel free to send me an email. My Boise State email is fine, or I think it's my other Gmail is on my website as well. Okay. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any questions for me.
Awesome. Well, hey, listeners, I decided to do something new today. I let ChatGPT write my shameless plug section. So here's what ChatGPT said. Hey, music lovers, tune into Moveable Do, the podcast that brings the magic of music to your ears. Explore the fascinating world of melodies, rhythms, and harmonies with our engaging episodes. Whether you're a seasoned musician or just love a good tune, Moveable Do has something for everyone. Share the joy of music with your friends, because great tunes are meant to be shared. Subscribe now and let the harmony begin. # Moveable Do Podcast. Thought that was kind of fun.
That works.
Well, Eric, it has been a lot of fun today. Thank you for coming into my office and doing this in person. And thank you for joining me on Moveable Do.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This was great.
My guest today was composer Dr. Eric Scott Alexander. If you have a recommendation for a future guest or an idea for the show, please email me at moveabledo@gmail.com. This is Steve Danielson. Keep the music moving.